Imagine a late afternoon by the Sea of Galilee. The sun is slowly setting, tinting the sky orange and gold, while the wind blows lightly, bringing with it the strong smell of the sea and freshly caught fish. It is against this backdrop that we meet Zebedee, a man with calloused hands and attentive eyes, used to facing the sun and the storms with the same steadfastness. He was born in the region of Bethsaida, a simple but bustling village where life revolved around fish, faith, and family. Zebedee grew up listening to the stories of the prophets, learning to twist ropes, mend nets, and read the signs of the weather in the clouds. From an early age, he understood that survival came from sweat, but the meaning of life lay in what could not be seen with the eyes. It lay in the promises of God, in the prayers whispered before casting the nets. He married Salome, a woman with a firm presence and a fiery heart. Together, they created a home where fish was served with faith, where the Sabbath was respected, and where their children grew up under the watchful eye of their father, who taught them not only how to fish, but how to be a man. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting Bible stories, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. If you like the content, feel free to support our work with a financial aid by clicking on the Thanks a Lot button. You can also become a member of the channel and enjoy exclusive benefits. But Zebedee wasn't just an ordinary man. There was something about him that escaped words, a quiet strength, a trust in God that could be seen even in the way he held his oar. And it was in this home, amidst spread nets and stories from the Old Testament, that James and John, his sons, were born. Two boys who would soon show that they had their father's fire in their eyes. And something more. Something that not even Zebedee could explain. James was the eldest. John followed close behind. Two brothers who seemed to have been born from the sea itself. Strong, restless, courageous. From an early age, it was hard to keep them at home. They were always running around on the sand, messing with their father's nets, asking too many questions, and wanting to go out on the boat before they even knew how to swim properly. Zebedee looked at them with a mixture of pride and concern. He knew that this restless spirit was a blessing, but it could also be a problem. The two of them had an impatient, almost explosive manner. If the fish didn't come, they complained. If the sea was too calm, they got bored. They weren't bad boys. They were just intense. As if thunder lived inside them, the kind that comes before the rain. Salome, with her direct manner, used to say that God had plans for them, and that until then, the world would have to put up with it. The nickname came later, but it seemed tailor-made. When Jesus called them to follow him, he looked at them and said, "Boanerges, sons of thunder." And look, it wasn't a figure of speech. It was almost a prophecy. What Zebedee had seen in his children's eyes since they were little now had a name that mixed force, noise, impulse, and fire. But the most curious thing was that, even with all this temperament, the two of them dropped everything in the blink of an eye. They were on the boat with their father in the middle of work when that man walked by and called them. And without a second thought, without long goodbyes or complicated explanations, they left. It was as simple as that, as if they had known, deep down, that they had been waiting for this all their lives. Zebedee stayed behind, standing on the sand. He watched his sons walk away, first with his eyes, then with his heart. And there, in the silence, broken only by the sound of the waves, another kind of journey began. Zebedee's life was the boat. Literally. He wasn't just some fisherman with an old net and a crooked oar. He owned a small family business which went beyond his children. He had employees, people who trusted him, who learned from him, who followed his rhythm, firm, direct, without beating around the bush. In those days, that was a sign of respect and livelihood. Zebedee had no gold, but he didn't go hungry either. He was one of those men who built his life with his own hands, day after day, drawing bread from the waters. James and John worked with him from a very young age. They helped with the nets, learned how to negotiate fish at the market, carried weights without complaining. Well, almost without complaining. It was a hard routine, but it bonded the three of them as if the sea had sewn them together. Sometimes they didn't even need to speak. Just one look from Zebedee, and the boys knew what to do. The boat was the heart of the family. It was where they sweated, prayed, and talked. Often the sky would lighten, and they would still be there, rowing in the dark, waiting for the first fish to bite the net. It was there, in the coming and going of the waves, that father and sons exchanged secrets, laughed at old stories, and discussed the Torah teachings they heard in synagogue. But all this took on a different flavor after the call. The boat, once a symbol of unity, became a sign of departure. James and John still returned from time to time, but their gaze was already on a different horizon. They spoke differently, with a sparkle in their eyes that Zebedee had never seen before. And as much as he missed the routine with them, he also knew something bigger was pulling his sons away from the shore. And it wasn't just their absence that was starting to change the rhythm of things. The presence of that Jesus, drawing ever closer, was turning everything upside down. It was one of those days that seemed just like any other. The sun rising slowly, the sound of the oar cutting through the water, the net being cast with that dry snap. Zebedee was in the boat as usual with James and John. They worked in silence, each concentrating on what they were doing. It was just another ordinary day, until it wasn't. On the shore, a small crowd was gathering. A man spoke, and the people listened with an attentiveness you don't see every day. He didn't shout, but every word seemed to pass through the air like an arrow. Zebedee looked up for a moment, curious. It was that rabbi from Nazareth, Jesus, the same one who went from town to town talking about repentance, about the kingdom of God, healing people no one else would look at. And now he was there, right in front of them. Jesus called out. He didn't shout, he didn't insist, he just called. James and John looked at each other, then they looked at their father. They didn't say anything, they just let the net fall from their hands. And off they went, just like that, as if they had been expecting it for a long time, as if that voice had come straight from the heart. Zebedee stood still, holding the weight of the net alone. He saw his sons moving away, felt the boat rocking in a strange way. It wasn't the sea, it was emptiness. And for a moment, he didn't even know what to feel. Was it pride? Was it pain? It was a bit of both, perhaps. That scene, so quick, so silent, became a cut in his soul, a cut that bled faith and longing. But he didn't shout. He didn't try to pull anyone back. He just stood there as firm as ever. And Jesus went on with his children, disappearing into the dust of the road. What Zebedee perhaps didn't know was that moment, that silence full of everything, would be the beginning of a turning point that would not only change his children's lives, but also his own. After James and John left with Jesus, Zebedee's name began to disappear from history, fade away on paper, because in real life he was still there, standing firm in the same place where it all began. It was like those trees that no one notices anymore, but which continue to shade and support the entire land without making a sound. He went back to the boat. He continued fishing. He continued teaching the younger ones, guiding the employees, setting nets, pulling in fish, taking care of everything as he always had. But now there was something different in the air. The silence inside the boat was no longer the same. The absence of his children weighed more heavily than the basket full of tilapia, and yet he didn't complain. Zebedee had a kind of faith that didn't make a fuss. His faith didn't need to show. It was the kind that lives behind the scenes, but holds the line when everything seems to be turning upside down. While his children walked through unknown villages, witnessing miracles, hearing parables, learning to love their enemies and face fear, he was there, holding on to what he could, being the base, being the root. And perhaps that was his role all along, to be the ground. Because in order for someone to go up, they have to hold on tight down there. And Zebedee did this without needing to stand out, without needing to be on the front line. Even with a tight heart, even without answers, he trusted. In his own way, in his own time. Salome, his wife, didn't stand still either. Little by little, she began to get closer to Jesus, to get involved, to follow the group. And there, among the women who supported the ministry, she emerged as a strong presence. It was as if each of them had accepted a different part of that call. The sons, the mission, she, the service, and ZEBEDEU, the silent support. But what no one imagined was that this discreet woman, who shared her life with ZEBEDEU, would still appear in one of the most remarkable moments in all of history. Salome was never one to hide behind the curtains of history. She had the kind of presence that didn't need to raise her voice to be noticed. She walked firmly, spoke clearly, and had a look that said everything before the words came out. When James and John followed Jesus, she didn't just wait at home with her arms folded. She followed too. In a different way, yes, but with the same commitment. While ZEBEDEU kept an eye on things at home, maintaining the boat, the livelihood and the stability, Salome moved closer to the group of disciples. She helped, she served, she was present behind the scenes at the miracles, in the conversations in the shade of the olive trees, in the moments of hunger, thirst, and tiredness. It was as if she had found a mission of her own in Jesus' path, parallel to her children's, but just as important. And that was no small thing, even more so at that time. For a woman to leave the comfort of home, travel to distant lands, get involved in a mission led by a rabbi, it was daring, courageous, even frowned upon by some. But Salome didn't seem to mind. She knew who she was following, and that was enough. ZEBEDEU never tried to stop her. He didn't hold Salome by the hem of her garment, nor did he try to convince her to stay. He knew her too well for that. He knew that when she put something in her heart, no one could take it out. So, even from afar, he supported her. It was that silent complicity of someone who has shared a table, children, sorrows and dreams, of someone who understood that faith also has its own paths, and that sometimes these paths take opposite directions, but follow the same sky. And that's how Salome began to appear more and more, at the back of the crowd, or near the cross, a woman who wasn't there by chance. She was there for a purpose. While Salome followed Jesus closely, and James and John went deeper and deeper into the mission they had embraced, ZEBEDEU continued at the same pace as always. The boat, the sea, the nets, everything was still there. But inside, he was no longer the same. Something had changed. The old fisherman, who used to talk more about fish and wind, now stood in silence, looking up at the sky, as if waiting for an answer, or at least a sign. He wasn't a man for speeches. He didn't need one. His faith was the kind that doesn't make a sound, but withstands storms. ZEBEDEU didn't appear in the miracles, nor in the sermons, nor among those who bore the name of disciple. But every time his children came home, tired, dirty, excited by the stories they told, he listened. And he listened carefully. He would ask simple questions, let a smile slip from the corner of his mouth. He didn't doubt, he just absorbed everything. In times so full of mistrust and fear, he chose to trust. And that was huge, because following Jesus at that time wasn't just beautiful and inspiring, it was dangerous. The Pharisees turned up their noses, the Romans kept an eye out, and the people didn't always understand. But even so, ZEBEDEU didn't stand in his children's way. On the contrary, it was as if he blessed them day after day without saying a word. Perhaps he remembered Abraham when he handed over Isaac, or Anna, who gave Samuel, and he thought, I gave mine away too. But no altar, no knife, no show, just faith. A faith hidden behind a firm gaze and calloused hands. And it was this silent surrender, this unexplainable trust, that sustained the absence, the fear, and even the longing. Because even without leaving Bethsaida, ZEBEDEU took part in everything, with his heart, and this bond with his sons went far beyond blood. It would last until the last days of one and until the long days of the other. Time passed, and with it the sons of Zebedee ceased to be just those impetuous young men from the boat. James became one of the 12 apostles, John too, but each one took a path within his own calling. James was bold. He was direct, firm, quick to make decisions, just like his father. John, on the other hand, although he still carried the same fire, grew into someone sweeter, more contemplative. But the thunder still lived in both of them. Zebedee, back in Bethsaida, received news. Some came from the mouths of travelers, others from Salome herself when she returned from accompanying the group. But nothing prepared him for the news that arrived suddenly, like a sharp wind on a fishing morning. James had been killed. Herod had him arrested, and then he had him killed. Without trial, without defense, just because he was a follower of Jesus. They say that when Zebedee found out, he didn't cry in front of anyone. He just closed his eyes, remained silent, and took a deep breath, a heavy, painful silence, but firm. Like someone who understands that not everything needs to be explained, just accepted. Losing a child is never natural, even more so unfairly. But somehow Zebedee knew that James hadn't died for nothing. He had gone to the end with the same courage he had had since he was a boy, when he threw himself into the sea without fear of the current. And John stayed. He saw his brother go and carried on. He was the last to die of all the apostles. He lived for many years, saw a lot, wrote even more. He was the beloved disciple, the one who stood at the foot of the cross, who looked after Mary, who saw visions in exile. All this while bearing the same name, the same blood, the same spirit that came from Zebedee. But what still left the old fisherman silent was the mystery surrounding his own end. Because, while his sons followed the course of the story, he himself seemed to disappear from the scene. Nobody knows for sure how or when Zebedee left. The Bible is silent about it. No verse describes his last days. No letter mentions his end. It's as if he had slowly withdrawn from history, in the same way he had always lived, without attracting attention, without needing a stage. He just went like a boat that disappears over the horizon, but we can still hear the sound of the oar cutting through the water for a while. Perhaps he lived to see John become that respected figure among Jesus' followers, known for his wisdom and love. Perhaps he left earlier, his heart still heavy from James's absence. Or perhaps he left in peace, knowing that his children were where they should be, even if it had cost him everything. What is certain is that even though Zebedee's name disappeared from the sacred text, it never really disappeared. It was recorded in the Gospels not as the protagonist, but as the root. And every root is invisible when the tree grows, but without it, nothing can stand. His legacy is not only in the sons who followed the Master, but in what he planted in them long before the call, the sense of duty, the courage to choose, the faith to let down the nets. He was the kind of man who taught how to serve without having to show up, who accepted God's plan even without understanding all of it, and who trusted when everything around him screamed the opposite. A man who lived between the sea and faith, between silence and thunder. And it's curious to think that his name continued to echo even after the end, because to this day when someone talks about James and John, there he is, like a firm shadow behind their footsteps. But the most impressive thing is that even with so few appearances in the scriptures, Zebedee still carries an enormous symbolic weight that crosses the ages and reaches us here. The name Zebedee appears only a few times in the Gospels, quickly, almost like a whisper between the big stories. But what is striking is how much this name carries. Every time it is mentioned, it is linked to something greater than itself. James, son of Zebedee. John, son of Zebedee. It's not just a way of identifying. It's as if history was shouting even without saying it. They came from someone who left their mark. And what were those marks? He didn't heal the blind, multiply loaves of bread, write letters to churches, or climb mountains to pray, but he silently carried out one of the most difficult missions: to prepare and let go, to educate firmly and then let go, to be the father of two men who would change the world and yet keep his feet in the sand, his hands in the nets, and his heart surrendered. Is that a big deal or not? Zebedee didn't become a disciple in the formal sense. He didn't walk with Jesus through the towns, but his faith ran through his children's legs. He didn't give sermons in public, but his life taught without the need for a pulpit. He was the foundation that supported, the bridge between the ordinary and the called. And that makes him part of the mission. Even if he didn't say a word in the Gospels, even his children's nicknames carry a piece of him: sons of thunder. And thunder doesn't form out of nothing. It is born from an exact combination of force and atmosphere. James and John carried within them an energy that had roots, a force that began long before their encounter with Jesus. It began in a simple home by the sea, with a father who taught more by example than with words. And perhaps that's exactly the point. Because when we look at it, what really makes a difference on the journey is not just being at the front, but being the one who holds on tight when others take their first steps. Zebedee was that kind of person. A man who didn't need a stage, but who supported people who climbed onto it. A father who prepared his children for the world. And more than that, for the kingdom. He teaches us, without saying a word, that sometimes the greatest calling is not to drop everything and move on, but to remain firm where God has planted you. To be a constant presence, to be a support, to be a root. And the root doesn't appear, but without it the tree won't stand. It's easy to be enchanted by the names that shine, the faces that gain prominence. But the truth is that behind every James and John, there is a Zebedee, someone who formed, held, and then let go. The lesson he leaves behind is simple but profound. Sometimes the most important role is not the one in everyone's eyes, but the one in God's heart. He lived his faith in everyday life, by the sea, in caring for his home, in silent trust. And when it was time to hand it over, he did. Without resisting, without drama, with faith. We learn from Zebedee that anonymity does not mean purposelessness, that silence also preaches, that standing firm, even away from the spotlight, is a kind of courage, and that training people through patience and example is a mission as great as any miracle. That's why, even though his name only appears in passing in the scriptures, his story continues to echo, like distant thunder, steady, deep, unforgettable. A reminder that God sees what no one else sees, and he uses the simple to support the eternal. If you liked Zebedee's story and want to continue following other stories of faith and overcoming, be sure to like this video and share it with those you love. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any new content. Together, let's explore more powerful lessons from the Bible.